Shalom, Israel. We're back with part 5 of the Sabbath Resurrection Made Simple. Remember, in part 1, we covered the day of the resurrection and found out the scriptures tells us that it happened on Mia Sabbaton. That means the first Sabbath. That is the first of 7 Sabbaths in the count to the Festival of Weeks. In part 2, we covered the 3 days and 3 night prophecy, and we discovered that if we start our count from Passover day, 1 to 3 days and 1 to 3 nights, we also land on Mia Sabbaton, or the Sabbath. In part 3, we looked at the 3rd day prophecy, and we discovered that the first day of unleavened bread lands on the 15th, and that year it landed on the 5th day. The 16th is the 2nd day of unleavened bread. It landed on the 6th day of the week. And the 3rd day of unleavened bread, which is on the 17th, landed on the 7th day, or the Shabbat. And we also looked in part 4 at the year of the resurrection. And we're looking for this pattern where Passover landed in the middle of the week. And there was only 1 year in the time frame of 28 CE through 36 CE that this pattern happened. It was in 34 CE. On the same time, we looked to see if there was a possibility even for a first day of the week resurrection. And the only way you can do that is if Passover landed on a Thursday or the 5th day. And from 28 to 36, there was no Passover that landed on a Thursday. Meaning, in short, that is, from an astronomical point of view, a Sunday or a first day of the week resurrection is impossible. Today, we're going to be looking at the big picture. What does it mean that Yahushua Messiah rose from the grave on Shabbat? We need to realize that this day isn't a light matter. Some people go, well, what day does it matter? If he rose from the grave, he rose from the grave. Yah's trying to teach us something and what actually happened. And if we just go, it's not a big deal, then we're totally missing the point. This is part of the good news message. So we want to really focus in. And what is the big picture? What is the Sabbath resurrection all about? And we're going to need to look at a few things. We need to understand that the Sabbath points back to the Creator and His creation. We also know that the Sabbath points to the resurrection, as we have been talking about. But it also points to our future and the restoration. We need to remember that Yah has declared, or is declaring the end from the beginning, according to the book of Isaiah 46:10. And this is an important thing we need to understand, that in that first week, he's really declaring to us what he's going to do right there from the beginning, that it's actually a prophecy. And I want to just read just real quickly from the Torah. And this is Exodus 20, in the giving of the law. In verse 8, it says this: "Remember, or Zakar, the Sabbath day, and set it apart. 6 days you labor and shall do all your work. But the 7th day is a Sabbath." The 7th day is a Sabbath. So the pattern from the beginning, when Yah created the heavens and earth, he made everything in 6 days. He rested on the Sabbath. He gave instruction for his people to follow his pattern. You work 6 days, but the 7th you rest. You follow my pattern. This was the pattern from the beginning, and he wants his people to do that very pattern. A few chapters later, in Exodus chapter 31, he also tells us not only is it the sign between him and his people, but it's also an everlasting covenant. So the Sabbath is very important. And remember, in Exodus 20, it says, "Remember as a car the Sabbath day." So it wasn't something new. They were supposed to remember it. And he goes all the way back to the Creator and his creation. Now let's look at this big plan again. How is he declaring the end from the beginning? Well, in the book of 2 Peter chapter 3, verse 8, it is written, "But beloved ones, let not this one matter be hidden from you, that with Yahuwah 1 day is as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years as 1 day." So when we think of just the week, the 7 days here, with Yah, this could be 7,000 years that he has this plan. And this is important to understand to get the big picture of what the Sabbath resurrection is all about. Also in Genesis 6:3, it is written, "And Yahuwah said, My spirit shall not strive with man forever in his going astray. He is flesh, and his days shall be 120 years." In Hebrew, this word here is Shana, and also can mean cycles. And one of the largest cycles of time is a Jubilee cycle, a 50-year period. When we take 120 times 50, we get 6,000 years. And this is important because this could be understood, this verse here, that man is allotted 6,000 years, but Yah's not going to strive with man forever and him doing his own thing. But the seventh day belongs to Yah. Messiah says he is the master of the Sabbath. And this is really important. We're going to get into this more here in a second. So this is the pattern. 6 days of work, the Sabbath is rest. In the Renewed Covenant writings, we also read, "So there remains a Sabbath keeping for the people of Elohim." And this is a very common passage, and a lot of people quote this a lot in support of the weekly Sabbath, and I totally agree with it. There definitely remains a Sabbath keeping for the people of Elohim. But let me just keep reading the context here, because you get a little bit more insight into what's going on. In verse 10 it says, "For the one having entered into his rest has also himself rested from his works, as Elohim rested from his own. Let us therefore do our uttermost to enter into that rest, lest anyone fall after the same example of disobedience." Remember, the children of Israel that were disobedient did not enter the promised land. So being obedient is really key. This Sabbath, guarding the Sabbath is really important because it shows that we are putting our trust in the Creator, that we're not working every single day. We're actually resting. We're honoring the Creator and what He has done by observing the Sabbath. So there remains a Sabbath keeping for the people of Elohim. Also, Martha said to him, "I know that he," talking about Lazarus, "shall rise again in the resurrection at the last day." The Sabbath day. This was known. They knew this. Matter of fact, Messiah taught in John 6 4 times that those who believe in Him will rise the last day. These are all references to that last day that points forward to the restoration, that His people will be raised up the last day. Now, where else is this in the Scripture? Well, the prophet Hosea talks about this. He was one of the last prophets to Israel, and he prophesied in the 4th millennial day. You can see here 1,000-year periods in the 7th day here. Well, this was his prophecy. "After 2 days he will revive us. On the 3rd day he will raise us up, that we may live in his sight." That's Hosea 6:2. So he prophesied here in the 4th day, and after 2 days, the 5th day and the 6th day, after the 6th day, the 3rd day, which also lands on the Sabbath, kind of like what we have here, Messiah rose on the 3rd day, but it was Shabbat. But he's talking about his people, Israel, that on the 3rd day he shall rise us up, that we may live in his sight. This is the same pattern. So this is an ancient prophecy that many already knew about this. This is what Paul was talking about. Martha knew that Lazarus would rise the last day, but Messiah, right after this, said he is the resurrection and the life. That those who believe him, though they die, they shall live. And this is really what this is pointing to. Not only Messiah rose from the grave on Sabbath, but those who put their trust in him that have fallen asleep, they will also be in his kingdom during his millennial reign. I want to connect this here in a second. We're going to read a couple more verses. In Genesis 2:3 it says this, "And Elohim blessed the 7th day and set it apart, because on it he rested from all his work which Elohim in creating had made." Now, connecting the beginning of the book to the end of the book, Revelation 26, it says, "Blessed and set apart is the one having part in the first resurrection. The second death possesses no authority over these, but they shall be priests of Elohim and a Messiah, and shall reign with him 1,000 years." Notice the connection here, blessed and set apart. It's linking all the way back to the Sabbath. And if you do a study, you're going to find out many things in Genesis show up again in the book of Revelation at the end. And here's the Sabbath in that first resurrection for 1,000 years. See, Messiah, 6,000 years is allotted for man, but there will be 1,000-year period, that Sabbath millennia, seventh millennia, where he's going to rest with his people. They're going to enter into his rest. This is talking about that first resurrection. And this is so powerful when you see it. So just like Hosea said, after 2 days, on the third day, he'll raise us up. So Messiah raising from the grave on Mia Sabbaton, it points to our future as well. And I'll just say this right now. We're in 2020 right now. And in 34 CE, this was the pattern. This was the pattern right here. Well, those who are going to be celebrating Passover lands right in the middle of the week this year. And we'll be able not only to remember Messiah's death as we celebrate Passover this year, but 3 days and 3 nights later, on this coming Shabbat, we can actually celebrate his resurrection on Mia Sabbaton. And we can look forward to our hope that we will also be raised up the third day. I hope this short session on the Sabbath resurrection has been helpful. Remember, the resources go in a lot more detail, and this is just an introduction into this subject. Shalom and blessings.